The scream tore through the pristine corporate plaza like a gunshot. "Ma'am, don't get in the car!" Ethan Rourke, still clutching a mop handle, exploded from the service exit and sprinted across the marble courtyard. CEO Vivian Hartwell froze with one Louboutin on the running board of her black Mercedes. Before she could process the janitor's wild-eyed terror, two security guards slammed him into the pavement. Cameras swiveled, tourists gasped, and somewhere in the chaos, a ticking clock neither of them could hear had just started counting down to a choice that would cost everything or save two lives no one believed were worth saving. If you want to know how a man who emptied trash cans for minimum wage became the only thing standing between a billionaire and a conspiracy that reached into operating rooms and body bags, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The thing about being invisible is that people say things around you they'd never say to your face. Ethan Rourke had spent 3 years mopping floors in the Hartwell Genomics Tower, and in that time he'd learned more about corporate treachery, extramarital affairs, and financial fraud than any board member would ever admit existed. He kept his head down, his daughter's medical bills folded in his wallet, and his mouth shut. Until today. The September afternoon had started like any other. Ethan clocked in at 2 p.m., changed into his gray maintenance uniform in the basement locker room that smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee, and began his route on the 14th floor. Research and development. The heart of Hartwell's empire. Glass walls everywhere, scientists in white coats moving between sterile labs like ghosts in a snow globe. He was emptying a recycling bin outside conference room C when he heard the shouting. "You told me the trial was approved!" A woman's voice, razor-sharp and furious. "You told me the FDA had signed off on phase 2. "Ma'am, we're weeks away from Weeks? My brother doesn't have weeks, Dr. Carlson. The scans show progression. If this treatment works, I need him in it now. If it doesn't, I need to know before I put another $50 million into your department." Ethan recognized that voice. Everyone in the building did. Vivian Hartwell didn't visit the 14th floor often. She had entire divisions to handle the science. But when she did, people straightened their spines and checked their words. She'd inherited Hartwell Genomics from her father at 29, quadrupled its value in 6 years, and had a reputation for being as brilliant as she was ruthless. Forbes called her the Ice Queen of Biotech. Employees called her ma'am and stayed out of her way. Ethan kept his head down and moved to the next bin. "Ms. Hartwell, I understand your urgency, but enrolling your brother outside protocol could compromise the entire study. We have safeguards for a reason." "Then explain why I'm seeing inconsistencies in your data reports. Explain why 3 of your test subjects developed acute renal failure and you buried it in footnotes." Silence. Heavy, damning silence. Ethan's hands slowed. He wasn't supposed to be listening, he was supposed to be invisible. But something in the way that silence stretched made his stomach tighten. "Those were unrelated complications," Dr. Carlson said finally. "Pre-existing conditions." "In all 3? Simultaneously?" Vivian's heels clicked toward the door. "I'm shutting down the trial until I get independent verification. And Carlson, if I find out you've lied to me about my brother's safety, I'll bury you so deep no review board will ever find the pieces." The door slammed open. Ethan barely had time to step back before Vivian Hartwell swept past him, trailing Chanel No. 5 in rage. She didn't glance at him. People like her never did. But Dr. Carlson did. The scientist stood in the doorway, face pale, eyes tracking Vivian's departure with something that looked a lot like panic. Then he turned, locked eyes with Ethan for half a second, and shut the door. Ethan's pulse kicked. He finished the recycling and moved down the hall, but his mind was spinning. Renal failure, buried data, a trial that wasn't approved, and Vivian Hartwell's brother, someone Ethan hadn't even known existed, was sick enough that she was willing to gamble on experimental treatment. He told himself it wasn't his business. He told himself to clock out, pick up Lila from the sitter, and forget he'd heard anything. But that night, lying in the dark of the studio apartment he shared with his 7-year-old daughter, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about those 3 test subjects, about renal failure, about buried complications, about the disease that was slowly killing his little girl. Lila had been diagnosed with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome when she was 4. It was a rare genetic disorder, 1 in 50,000, the doctors said, that weakened the walls of her blood vessels and made every day a gamble. A fall that would give another kid a bruise could cause Lila to hemorrhage internally. A bump that wouldn't even register could trigger an aneurysm. She'd already had 2 surgeries. The medical debt had cost Ethan his marriage, his house, and every dollar of savings he'd ever had. His ex-wife, Michelle, had remarried and moved to Arizona, sending guilt-money birthday cards twice a year but never visiting. Ethan didn't blame her. Watching your child live under a death sentence did things to people. Lila didn't know how sick she was. She was 7. She knew she got tired easily, knew she had to be careful, knew Daddy worked a lot of hours to pay for her doctors. But she didn't know that her geneticist had pulled Ethan aside 3 months ago and said, "I'm sorry, we're managing symptoms, but there's no cure. You need to start thinking about quality of life." Ethan had nodded, thanked the doctor, walked to his car, and then sat in the parking garage and sobbed until his ribs ached. He wasn't giving up. He couldn't. But hope was expensive, and Ethan was tapped out. So when he walked into work the next day and saw the shredded documents in the confidential waste bin outside Dr. Carlson's office, he didn't think. He just acted. It was stupid. It was dangerous. It was probably illegal. But Ethan had learned to operate the building's industrial shredder during his first week, and he knew that the bins outside executive offices got emptied into a secure container before being pulped. If he worked fast, if he was careful, he could pull the shred bag, take it to the loading dock, and piece together whatever Carlson was trying to destroy. He waited until midnight. The building emptied out after 10 on weekdays, except for the overnight security guards who did their rounds every 45 minutes. Ethan had their schedule memorized. He moved through the 14th floor like a shadow, pulling the black shred bag from the bin and hauling it down the service stairs to the loading dock. The night air was cool, sharp with the smell of diesel and garbage. Ethan spread a tarp on the concrete, dumped the bag, and started sorting. It took him an hour. Most of it was junk, printed emails, meeting agendas, drafts of reports, but buried in the pile were fragments of something else: medical records, lab results, and a patient list with names, dates, and a single word stamped across the top in red ink: liquidate. Ethan's hands shook as he arranged the pieces. There were 5 names. 3 were marked deceased. 1 was marked transferred. And the last, listed as Subject K, had a note in the margin: immediate termination upon CEO discovery. Liability unacceptable. Subject K, Kieran Hartwell. Ethan's stomach dropped. He pulled another shred strip from the pile and fitted it into place. It was a toxicology report. The language was technical, dense, but Ethan had spent 3 years reading Lila's medical charts. He knew enough to recognize the words that mattered: acute tubular necrosis, hepatotoxicity, coagulopathy. The trial wasn't curing anyone. It was poisoning them. And Vivian Hartwell's brother was next. Ethan didn't sleep. He went home, checked on Lila, curled in her bed with her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, and spent the rest of the night on his laptop, cross-referencing the fragments with public medical journals and FDA databases. By sunrise, he had a picture. Dr. Carlson wasn't just cutting corners. He was running a fraudulent trial using fabricated data, and the miracle cure he'd been developing was a cocktail of experimental compounds that had failed safety reviews in 3 other countries. The patients weren't getting better. They were being quietly euthanized to hide the evidence. And Vivian Hartwell, for all her brilliance and power, had no idea. Ethan knew what he had to do. He also knew that no one would believe him. He was a janitor, a nobody. If he walked into Vivian Hartwell's office with shredded documents and a conspiracy theory, security would throw him out before he finished his first sentence. But if he didn't do something, Kieran Hartwell would die. And the same people who'd killed 3 patients would keep killing until someone stopped them. So Ethan made a choice. He printed everything he could piece together, stuffed it into a folder, and clocked in for his shift. He worked his route, kept his head down, and waited. At 4:30 p.m., Vivian Hartwell's assistant sent a building-wide email. Ms. Hartwell would be departing early for a private appointment. Her car would be waiting in the executive roundabout at 5 p.m. Ethan's heart hammered. He had 15 minutes. He ditched his cleaning cart, grabbed the folder, and ran. The executive lobby was all white marble and geometric art, the kind of space designed to make visitors feel small. Ethan had only been up here twice, once for new hire orientation, once to fix a broken sink in the executive washroom. He didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. The receptionist looked up as he approached, her expression shifting from polite to suspicious in half a second. "Can I help you?" "I need to see Ms. Hartwell." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but then you need to leave." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but the elevator chimed and Vivian Hartwell stepped out, flanked by two assistants and her head of security, a granite-faced man named Cole Graves, who looked like he bench-pressed Buicks for fun. Vivian was on her phone, walking fast, her voice clipped and impatient. "I don't care what the board thinks. If they want to question my decisions, they can schedule a meeting. Until then, they can—" "Ms. Hartwell!" Ethan shouted. Everyone froze. Vivian lowered her phone. Her eyes, cold, green, calculating, locked onto Ethan like a sniper finding her target. "Who are you?" "My name is Ethan Rourke. I work in maintenance. I need to talk to you about your brother." Graves stepped forward, one hand moving toward his belt. "Sir, you need to leave." "Please," Ethan said, voice cracking. "Your brother is in danger. Dr. Carlson is lying to you. The trial isn't real. It's a cover-up. I have proof." Vivian's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Proof of what?" Ethan thrust the folder toward her. "They're killing people. 3 patients are already dead. Your brother is next." Graves grabbed Ethan's wrist, twisting it just enough to make the folder drop. Papers scattered across the marble. "Ma'am, I'll handle this." But Vivian raised a hand. "Wait." She crouched, picking up one of the shredded documents. Her eyes scanned the text. Then she picked up another. And another. When she stood, her face was stone. "Where did you get these?" "The shred bin outside Carlson's office." "You went through confidential waste?" "Yes." "That's a felony." Ethan met her gaze. "So is murdering patients." For a long moment, Vivian said nothing. Then she turned to Graves. "Get the car. We're leaving. Now." Graves hesitated. "Ma'am. Now, Cole." Graves nodded and spoke into his radio. Vivian looked back at Ethan, her expression unreadable. "If you're lying to me, I will destroy you. If you're not—" She paused. "Then we have a serious problem." Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. "I'm not lying." "We'll see." Vivian walked past him toward the exit, her heels clicking like a countdown. Ethan grabbed the scattered papers and followed, his hand shaking so hard he nearly dropped them again. Outside, the black Mercedes was idling in the roundabout, engine purring. The driver stood by the rear door, waiting. Vivian was halfway across the plaza when Ethan's brain made a connection, a terrible, impossible connection. The toxicology report. Acute coagulopathy. Sudden onset. The patient marked transferred. No cause of death listed. Just a note. Seizure during transport. Ethan's eyes snapped to the car. And then he was running. "Ma'am, don't get in the car." Vivian spun, confusion flashing across her face. Graves moved like lightning, intercepting Ethan and slamming him into the pavement. Pain exploded through Ethan's shoulder. His vision blurred. "Bomb!" Ethan gasped. "Check the car! Check the—" Graves pressed a knee into Ethan's spine. "Don't move." "Cole!" Vivian's voice cut through the chaos. "Check the car!" Graves didn't let up, but he barked into his radio. "Code red. Possible IED. Evacuate the roundabout. Get the bomb squad here now." Within seconds, sirens wailed. Security poured out of the building. Tourists scattered. The driver stumbled back from the Mercedes, hands raised. And Ethan, pinned to the cold marble with his cheek pressed against stone, could only watch as his one chance to save Lila and Kieran Hartwell spiraled into chaos. The bomb squad took 40 minutes to clear the car. 40 minutes of Ethan sitting in flex cuffs on the curb while police and security swarmed the plaza. 40 minutes of strangers staring, recording on their phones, whispering. 40 minutes of Vivian Hartwell standing 20 feet away with her arms crossed, watching him like a scientist observing a specimen. When the lead officer finally approached her, his face was grim. "Ma'am, the vehicle is clean, no explosives, no tampering." Vivian's jaw tightened. She walked over to Ethan and crouched in front of him, her eyes level with his. You just caused a citywide panic for nothing. I didn't. Give me one reason I shouldn't have you arrested. Ethan's throat was dry. His daughter's face flashed through his mind. Lila, waiting at the sitters, probably watching cartoons. No idea that Daddy might not come home tonight. He had one shot, one sentence. Your brother has vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Ethan said quietly. So does my daughter. Vivian's expression froze. I saw the patient notes, Ethan continued. Subject K. That's Kieran, and the trial he's in isn't treating the disease, it's accelerating it. The compound they're using causes vascular rupture. The patients who died? It wasn't complications, it was assassination. That's insane. Is it? Ethan held her gaze. Why would Dr. Carlson shred those documents the same day you threatened to shut him down? Why would the patient marked transferred have a seizure in transit with no history of neurological issues? Why would your brother be listed for immediate termination the second you found out the trial was dirty? Vivian stood abruptly. She turned to Graves. Get Carlson. Bring him to my office, now. Graves nodded and moved toward the building. Vivian looked back at Ethan. If you're wrong about this, I'll make sure you never work again. If you're right, she paused. Then someone in my company just tried to kill my brother. She gestured to the officer. Cut him loose. The cuffs came off. Ethan stood, rubbing his wrists, his heart pounding. Vivian was already walking back toward the tower, her phone to her ear. I need Kieran's medical records. Everything. And I need them 5 minutes ago. Ethan followed, his legs unsteady, his mind racing. He'd just bet everything on a conspiracy he'd pieced together from shredded trash. And now the most powerful woman in the city was about to find out if he was a lunatic or a savior. Vivian's office was on the 22nd floor, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The furniture was expensive and minimalist, glass desk, leather chairs, a single piece of abstract art that probably cost more than Ethan's annual salary. She didn't invite him to sit. Graves returned 10 minutes later, Dr. Carlson in tow. The scientist looked pale, his confidence from yesterday completely gone. Ms. Hartwell, I don't understand why— Sit down. Carlson sat. Vivian dropped the folder of shredded documents onto the desk. Explain these. Carlson's eyes widened. Those are confidential. They're evidence. And if you lie to me one more time, I will have Cole throw you through that window. Graves folded his arms. He didn't smile, but his eyes promised he'd enjoy it. Carlson swallowed. The trial had some setbacks. 3 deaths is not a setback. It's manslaughter. They were terminal patients. We were trying to save— By poisoning them? Vivian's voice was ice. By fabricating data and hiding adverse events from the FDA? We were close. Another 6 months and we could have— Where's my brother? Carlson froze. Where is Kieran? He's in the facility, the research wing. Is he in the trial? Carlson didn't answer. Vivian's head slammed onto the desk. Is my brother in the trial? He was enrolled this morning, Carlson whispered. You authorized it. I authorized enrollment pending independent review. I never cleared him for treatment. The paperwork was expedited. Vivian's face went white. She turned to Graves. Get a team to the research facility. Pull Kieran out. Now. Graves was already moving. Vivian looked at Ethan. You're coming with me. Why? Because if my brother is dying, you're the only person in this building who seems to give a damn. The research facility was 15 minutes away, a converted warehouse in the industrial district that Hartwell Genomics used for high-level trials. Vivian drove herself, a sleek Audi that cut through traffic like a blade. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, clutching the folder, his mind spinning. Why did you do it? Vivian asked, eyes on the road. Do what? Risk everything to warn me. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Ethan stared out the window. My daughter is 7. She has the same disease as your brother. I've spent 3 years watching her suffer while doctors told me there's no cure. His voice cracked. If there was even a chance that trial was real, that it could save her, I had to know. But when I saw what they were doing, he trailed off. Vivian's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. How long does she have? They don't know. Could be years. Could be months. What's her name? Lila. Vivian was silent for a long moment. Then, if we get Kieran out alive, I'll fund every specialist on the planet to find a real cure. I promise you that. Ethan looked at her, searching for the lie, the angle, but all he saw was a woman who'd just realized she'd been played. Thank you, he said quietly. They pulled into the facility parking lot just as Graves' SUV screeched to a stop. Vivian was out of the car before the engine died, striding toward the entrance. Graves met her at the door, his face grim. Ma'am, we have a problem. What problem? The building's on lockdown. Someone triggered the biohazard protocol. We can't get in. Vivian's eyes narrowed. Override it. We're trying, but... A muffled alarm echoed from inside the building. Then, through the reinforced glass doors, Ethan saw movement. Men in dark suits, not lab coats. Two of them were pushing a gurney toward the freight elevator, a body-shaped form covered by a white sheet. Ethan's heart stopped. That's him, he whispered. That's Kieran. Vivian's face went cold. She turned to Graves. Break the door. Ma'am, that's 3-inch ballistic glass. Then find another way in. Graves cursed and pulled out his phone, barking orders. But Ethan was already moving. He ran along the side of the building, his eyes scanning for anything. A service entrance, a loading dock, a window. There. A narrow vent shaft near the ground, the grate secured with rusted screws. Here! Ethan shouted. Vivian and Graves ran over. Graves took one look and shook his head. That's maybe 18 inches. No one's fitting through that. I will, Ethan said. Vivian met his eyes. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Graves pulled a multi-tool from his belt and handed it to Ethan. You've got 5 minutes before we blow the front door. Don't get killed. Ethan unscrewed the grate, dropped into the shaft, and crawled into the darkness. The ventilation shaft was narrower than Ethan had thought, the metal walls pressing against his shoulders as he dragged himself forward on his elbows. Dust and decades of accumulated grime coated his hands, and somewhere in the darkness ahead he could hear the low hum of industrial air handlers. The beam from his phone, clutched between his teeth, barely cut through the black, illuminating only a few feet of corrugated metal at a time. He'd crawled through worse. When Lila was 5 and they'd lived in that basement apartment on Archer Street, the landlord had refused to fix the furnace until Ethan squeezed through a crawl space half this size to replace the pilot light himself. He'd done it because his daughter was cold. He was doing this because someone else's daughter, someone else's son, was about to die the same slow, brutal death that haunted his nightmares. The shaft opened into a vertical drop. Ethan caught himself just before tumbling into emptiness, his fingers clawing at the metal edge. Below, maybe 8 feet down, was a concrete floor in the dim glow of emergency lighting. He could hear voices, muffled, urgent, echoing through walls. Ethan lowered himself as far as he could, then dropped. The impact jarred his knees, sent pain shooting up his spine, but he stayed on his feet. He was in a mechanical room, all humming equipment and labeled pipes. A service door stood half open on the opposite wall. He moved toward it, every nerve screaming at him to be careful, to be smart. But there wasn't time for careful. Through the gap in the door, he could see a hallway, sterile white walls, fluorescent lights flickering like they were running on backup power. And at the far end, the freight elevator doors were sliding shut. Ethan ran. He hit the hallway at full sprint, his boots echoing on linoleum, and slammed his hand against the elevator call button. The panel didn't respond. Locked down. He spun, searching for stairs, another elevator, anything, and nearly collided with a woman in a lab coat. She gasped, stumbling backward. Who the hell are you? Where did that elevator go? Ethan demanded. Security! We need security! Ethan grabbed her by the shoulders, not rough, but firm enough to cut through the panic. Listen to me. The people who just took that gurney upstairs, they're going to kill the patient. I need to know where they went. The woman's eyes went wide. You're insane. I'm the janitor from the main tower, and I just crawled through a vent shaft because your boss is murdering people. Now tell me where that elevator goes, or I swear to God Sub-level 3, she blurted. The surgical wing, it's decommissioned. Nobody uses it anymore. Ethan released her and bolted toward the stairwell. Behind him, the woman was already on her phone, her voice shrill. We have an intruder in the east wing. He slammed through the stairwell door and took the steps 3 at a time, his lungs burning. Sub-level 3, decommissioned. The perfect place to hide a body. The stairwell spat him out into a corridor that looked like it had been abandoned mid-renovation. Drop cloths covered equipment, exposed wiring hung from the ceiling, and the air smelled like mildew and chemicals. Ethan moved fast, trying every door he passed. Locked, locked, locked. Then he heard it, a voice, cold and clinical, echoing from somewhere ahead. Increase the drip to 4 milligrams per minute. We need this done in the next 10 minutes. Ethan's blood turned to ice. He followed the sound to a set of double doors marked Surgical Suite C, authorized personnel only. Through the small reinforced window he could see them, 2 men in surgical scrubs, faces obscured by masks, standing over a gurney. The patient's chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. An IV stand stood beside the bed, a dark amber fluid dripping into the line. One of the men glanced at a monitor. Vitals are dropping, heart rate 70 and falling. Good. Another few minutes and we can log it as cardiac arrest. Natural progression of the disease. Ethan's vision tunneled. He tried the door, locked. He slammed his shoulder against it, once, twice, but the reinforced frame didn't budge. Think. Think! His eyes landed on a fire alarm panel on the wall. He smashed the glass with his elbow, grabbed the pull handle, and yanked. Nothing happened. Of course. The system was in lockdown, but the panel had another feature, a manual override for emergency ventilation. Ethan flipped the switch. Somewhere in the walls, machinery groaned to life. The air pressure in the corridor shifted, and inside the surgical suite, the men looked up in confusion as the room's atmospheric controls began cycling, purging contaminated air in preparation for a biohazard event. The doors wouldn't unlock, but the pressure differential would force anyone inside to open them manually to equalize. Ethan pressed himself against the wall and waited. 30 seconds later, one of the men cursed and moved toward the door. What the hell is going on with the ventilation? The door swung open. Ethan hit him like a freight train. They went down in a tangle of limbs, Ethan's fist connecting with the man's jaw. The second man spun, reaching for something on a surgical tray, a scalpel, but Ethan was faster. He kicked the tray, sent instruments clattering across the floor, and drove his shoulder into the man's chest. Get off me, the man snarled, clawing at Ethan's face. Ethan didn't let go. He drove the man backward into a crash cart, and the whole thing toppled, monitors and equipment smashing against the tile. The first man was getting up, blood streaming from his nose, fumbling for a phone. Ethan grabbed the IV stand and swung it like a bat. The base caught the man across the ribs and sent him sprawling. Stay down, Ethan gasped. But the second man had the scalpel now, his eyes wild. You just signed your death warrant, you stupid... The door exploded inward. Cole Graves filled the doorway, his sidearm drawn, his expression carved from granite. Behind him, 2 more security officers fanned out, weapons raised. Drop it, Graves said, his voice flat. The man with the scalpel hesitated. Then, slowly, he let it clatter to the floor. Graves moved forward, grabbed the man by the collar, and slammed him face first against the wall. The other security officers secured the second man, and Ethan, breathing hard, turned to the gurney. The patient was still alive, barely. His skin was gray, his lips tinged blue, and the monitor showed a heart rate in the 50s. But he was breathing. Ethan moved to the IV line and ripped it out of the man's arm. Don't touch him, one of the men shouted. You're contaminating. Shut up, Graves said, and zip-tied the man's wrists with brutal efficiency. Vivian Hartwell appeared in the doorway, her face white. She crossed the room in 3 strides and looked down at the patient. Kieran, she whispered. The man on the gurney didn't respond. His eyes were closed, his chest rising and falling in uneven gasps. Vivian's hand went to his wrist, checking for a pulse. Her fingers trembled. He's crashing. We need a med team now. Graves was already on the radio. This is Graves. We need paramedics at the research facility, sublevel 3, surgical suite C. Critical patient. Possible poisoning. Move. Ethan stared at the IV bag he'd ripped free, the amber fluid still dripping onto the floor. What is that? One of the men, the one Graves had against the wall, laughed bitterly. You think you're a hero? You have no idea what you've just done. Vivian turned, her eyes blazing. What did you give him? The man stayed silent. Vivian stepped closer, her voice dropping to something cold and lethal. I asked you a question. Compound Theta 7, the man said finally. Experimental vascular agent, designed to accelerate arterial degradation. You poisoned him. We neutralized a liability. Your brother was going to expose the trial. Dr. Carlson couldn't allow that. Vivian's hand moved so fast, Ethan almost missed it. She slapped the man hard enough to snap his head sideways, and when she spoke again, her voice was shaking with rage. My brother is not a liability. He's a human being, and you just tried to murder him. The man spat blood onto the floor. You want to talk about murder? Ask your precious janitor what he did to get in here. Ask him how many laws he broke. Vivian didn't look at Ethan. I don't care. Cole, get these two out of my sight before I do something I regret. Graves hauled both men toward the door, passing them off to the other officers. Vivian turned back to Kieran, her hands hovering over him like she wanted to touch him, but was afraid she'd make it worse. He's not waking up, she said quietly. Ethan moved to the monitor, heart rate 52, blood pressure dropping, oxygen saturation at 88%. He wasn't a doctor, but he'd spent enough time in hospitals to know what dying looked like. The compound they gave him, Ethan said. Is there an antidote? I don't know, Vivian said. I don't even know what Theta 7 is. Carlson never filed it with the review board. Ethan's mind raced. Vascular degradation. That meant the drug was attacking Kieran's blood vessels, the same vessels already weakened by Ehlers-Danlos. The combination would be catastrophic. Hemorrhaging, organ failure, stroke. His eyes went back to the IV stand, the amber fluid. Wait, Vivian looked up. What? Ethan grabbed the bag, held it up to the light. The label was handwritten, not printed. No lot number, no pharmaceutical markings, just a scrawled notation, T7-ADJ. This isn't the compound, Ethan said slowly. It's an adjuster. They were fine-tuning the dosage. So? So if they were adjusting it, that means they were monitoring his response in real time. Which means, Ethan spun, scanning the room. There, a laptop on the counter, screen still glowing. He crossed to it, his fingers flying over the keys. What are you doing? Vivian demanded. Looking for the protocol. Ethan pulled up a file directory, found a folder labeled Subject K, and opened it. Inside were dozens of documents, dosage charts, vitals logs, chemical formulas, and buried in the middle, a file titled Reversal Protocol. Ethan clicked it open. The document was dense, technical, full of medical jargon. He didn't understand, but one section stood out, highlighted in yellow. In case of adverse reaction, administer sodium thiosulfate IV push, followed by continuous infusion of acetylcysteine. Binds free radicals and prevents vascular cascade. Here, Ethan said, turning the laptop toward Vivian. This is the antidote. Vivian read it, her expression unreadable. Then she grabbed her phone and dialed. This is Vivian Hartwell. I need an emergency medical consult. Now. She rattled off the protocol, her voice clipped and precise. I don't care if you have to wake up every pharmacologist in the city. Find those drugs and get them to the research facility in the next 10 minutes or you're all fired. She hung up, looked at Ethan. If this doesn't work, it'll work, Ethan said, with more confidence than he felt. Vivian's eyes searched his face. How did you know to look for that? I didn't. I just knew they wouldn't poison someone without a way to reverse it. Insurance. In case something went wrong. Something did go wrong. You. Ethan almost smiled. Yeah. The sound of sirens filled the hallway. Moments later, paramedics rushed in, hauling equipment, shouting questions. Vivian relayed the protocol while Ethan stepped back, giving them room to work. They got Kieran on oxygen, started the IV push, hooked him up to a dozen monitors. The lead paramedic, a woman with gray streaks in her hair, and the calm intensity of someone who'd seen everything, barked orders like a general. "Vitals are stabilizing," she said after a few minutes. "Heart rate 65, BP coming up. He's responding." Vivian's knees almost buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the gurney, her hand gripping the rail. "He's going to make it," the paramedic said. "But we need to get him to a hospital, now." They loaded Kieran onto a stretcher and wheeled him out, Vivian following close behind. Ethan stayed in the surgical suite, staring at the overturned equipment, the blood on the floor, the IV bag still dripping poison onto the tile. Graves appeared in the doorway. "You good?" Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure it was true. "Hell of a thing you did," Graves said. "I didn't have a choice." "We always have a choice. You made the right one." Graves paused. "Ms. Hartwell wants you at the hospital. You riding with me or taking your own car?" Ethan blinked. "I don't have a car." "Then you're with me." They walked out together, past the police tape and forensic teams already swarming the facility. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp, cutting through the adrenaline fog in Ethan's brain. He checked his phone. 11 messages from the sitter, each one more frantic than the last. "I need to call my daughter," Ethan said. Graves nodded. "Make it quick." Ethan dialed. The sitter picked up on the first ring. "Mr. Rourke, where are you?" "Lila's been asking—" "I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen. There was an emergency at work. I'll be there as soon as I can." "Is everything okay?" Ethan looked back at the facility, at the flashing lights and armed guards. "Yeah, everything's okay." He hung up. Graves was already walking toward the SUV. Ethan followed, his legs heavy, his mind still spinning. They drove to County General in silence. Graves didn't ask questions, and Ethan didn't offer explanations. When they pulled into the ambulance bay, Vivian was standing outside the emergency entrance, arms crossed, staring at nothing. Ethan got out. "Is he alive?" Vivian said. Sedated. They're running tests, but the doctors think he'll recover." She looked at Ethan, and for the first time since he'd met her, her armor cracked. "You saved his life." Don't." Vivian's voice was firm. "Don't minimize what you did. You risked everything, your job, your freedom, maybe your life, to save a stranger. That's not nothing." Ethan didn't know what to say. He'd spent 3 years being invisible, and now the most powerful woman in the city was telling him he mattered. "I need to ask you something," Vivian said, "and I need you to be honest." "Okay. Why did you really do this? You said it was because of your daughter, but there's more, isn't there?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "When Lila was diagnosed, the doctors told me there was no cure. Just management. Just waiting. I've spent 3 years watching her get weaker, watching her miss school and birthday parties and every normal thing a kid should have. And every night I go to bed wondering if tomorrow's the day I lose her." His voice cracked. "When I saw those documents, when I realized your brother had the same disease, I couldn't let him die. Because if there's even a chance that someone somewhere can find a real cure, then maybe Lila has a future. And I can't give up on that." Vivian was silent for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and did something Ethan never expected. She hugged him. It was brief, almost awkward, but it was real. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "I told you I'd fund every specialist on the planet to find a cure. I meant it. But first, we need to finish this." "Finish what?" "Taking down everyone who tried to kill my brother." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Carlson's not working alone, is he?" "No," Vivian said. "This goes deeper than one corrupt scientist. Someone bankrolled that trial. Someone signed off on Theta 7, and someone gave the order to liquidate Kieran." Her jaw set. "I'm going to find out who, and when I do, I'm going to bury them." Graves stepped out of the SUV, his phone to his ear. He listened for a moment, his expression darkening, then hung up. "Ma'am, we have a problem." "What now?" "Dr. Carlson is gone. Building security says he left the tower an hour ago. We've got people at his house, but he's not there. His phone's off. His car's missing." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "He's running. Looks that way. Then find him. I don't care if you have to turn over every rock in this city. I want him in custody by morning." Graves nodded and walked away, already barking orders into his phone. Vivian turned back to Ethan. You should go home. Get some rest. This is going to get ugly, and I don't want you caught in the crossfire. What about you? I'm going to stay here. Make sure Kieran's stable. And then I'm going to start digging. She paused. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. Ethan nodded. He wanted to say something profound, something that captured the weight of the night, but all he could manage was, take care of him. I will. Ethan walked toward the exit, his body aching, his mind exhausted. But as he pushed through the doors into the cool night air, one thought kept circling through his head. This wasn't over. Carlson was running, which meant he was scared, and scared people did desperate things. Ethan pulled out his phone and called Mrs. Chen again. I'm on my way. But do me a favor, keep the doors locked. Don't let anyone in except me. Mr. Rourke, you're scaring me. Just, please, I'll explain when I get there. He hung up and started walking. The hospital was only a mile from his apartment, and he didn't have money for a cab. The streets were quiet, the city settling into the dead hours between midnight and dawn. Ethan's shadow stretched long under the streetlights, and with every step, the adrenaline drained a little more, leaving only bone-deep exhaustion. He was halfway home when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Ethan almost didn't answer, but something made him press the green button. Hello? Silence. Then a voice, low, distorted, like it was being run through a scrambler. You made a mistake tonight, Mr. Rourke. Ethan stopped walking. Who is this? Someone who's very interested in keeping certain secrets buried. You should have stayed invisible. Carlson? A dry laugh. Dr. Carlson is a fool. But you're dangerous. You see things other people miss. That makes you a problem. If you're trying to scare me, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm giving you a chance. Walk away. Forget what you saw. Go back to your mop and your little girl and your quiet life. Because if you don't, I'll make sure that life ends. Ethan's blood ran cold. You stay away from my daughter. Then stay away from Vivian Hartwell. Stay away from this investigation, or Lila won't live to see her 8th birthday. The line went dead. Ethan stood frozen on the sidewalk, his hand shaking so hard he nearly dropped the phone. His mind raced. They knew about Lila. They knew where he lived. They knew everything. He started running. By the time he reached his apartment building, his lungs were on fire and his vision was blurred with sweat. He took the stairs 2 at a time, fumbled with his keys, and burst through the door. Mrs. Chen was on the couch, knitting, her expression calm. Lila was asleep in her bed, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Everything okay? Mrs. Chen asked, looking up. Ethan forced himself to breathe, to sound normal. Yeah, sorry I'm late. Work was crazy. Mrs. Chen gathered her things. She was asking about you earlier. I told her you'd be home soon. Thank you. Really? Mrs. Chen left and Ethan locked the door behind her. Deadbolt, chain, everything. Then he walked to Lila's room and stood in the doorway, watching her sleep. She looked so small, so fragile. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow, and Ethan could see the faint bruise on her arm where the nurse had drawn blood last week. He'd promised to protect her, to keep her safe, and now someone was threatening to take her away. Ethan's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. He answered without thinking. I told you to walk away, the distorted voice said, and I told you to stay away from my daughter. Then we have a problem. Because this doesn't end until you disappear, Mr. Rourke, one way or another. Who are you? Someone who's been cleaning up messes a lot longer than you've been making them. And trust me, you're about to become a very big mess. The line went dead again. Ethan stared at the phone, his heart pounding. He thought about calling the police, but what would he say? Someone threatened me over the phone? They'd take a report, maybe send a patrol car, and then nothing. Because whoever this was, they had reach, they had resources. They'd already infiltrated Hartwell Genomics, corrupted a trial, and nearly killed a man in a locked surgical suite. Ethan couldn't fight that alone, but maybe he didn't have to. He pulled up Vivian's number and typed a message. Someone just threatened my daughter. We need to talk. The response came 30 seconds later. Where are you? Home. Stay there. I'm sending Graves. Ethan sat on the edge of Lila's bed. his hand resting on her small shoulder, and waited. Outside, the city hummed with traffic and distant sirens. Inside, the silence was suffocating. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Ethan checked the peephole. Graves, flanked by two plainclothes officers. He opened the door. Graves stepped inside, his eyes scanning the apartment like he was mapping exits. "Tell me what happened." Ethan told him. The call, the threat, the promise that Lila wouldn't see 8. Graves' jaw tightened. "You get a number?" "Unknown, probably burner phones." "Voice?" "Distorted. But they knew everything, my name, my daughter, where I live." Graves nodded. "We're putting a detail on your building. 2 officers, 24/7. Nobody gets in without ID." "That's not enough," Ethan said. "Whoever this is, they're not going to stop because of a couple of cops." "Then what do you want me to do?" Ethan met his eyes. "I want to help you find them. I want to finish what I started." Graves studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and called Vivian. "He wants in." A pause. "Yeah, I think he's serious." Another pause. Graves hung up. "Ms. Hartwell says if you're in, you're all in. That means no more lone wolf stunts. You follow orders, you stay close, and you don't take chances. Understood?" Ethan nodded. "Understood." "Good. Because tomorrow morning, we're going after the people who tried to kill Kieran Hartwell. And if they're threatening your daughter, that means they're scared." Graves smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Scared people make mistakes, and when they do, we'll be ready." Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in the rickety chair beside Lila's bed, watching the rise and fall of her chest, listening to the soft wheeze that sometimes crept into her breathing when she was tired. Every creak of the building made his pulse spike. Every shadow that passed the window made his hand move toward his phone. The 2 officers Graves had posted were stationed in the hallway outside his apartment door. Ethan could hear them murmuring occasionally, the soft crackle of their radios. It should have made him feel safer. It didn't. At 5:30 in the morning, Lila stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, still heavy with sleep, and she looked at him with that particular confusion kids get when they wake up and find their world slightly different than they left it. "Daddy?" Her voice was small, scratchy. "Hey, Bug." Ethan forced a smile, leaned forward to brush her hair back from her forehead. "You okay? Why are you in my room?" "Just wanted to make sure you were sleeping good." She yawned, her little fist rubbing at her eyes. "Did you just get home?" "A while ago. I'm sorry I was late." Lila sat up slowly, the way she always did, careful, measured, like she was testing whether her body would cooperate. She reached for her rabbit and pulled it into her lap. "Mrs. Chen said you had an emergency at work." "Yeah, it was complicated." "Are you in trouble?" Ethan's throat tightened. Sometimes Lila's ability to read him was terrifying. She was 7, but she'd spent half her life in hospitals, around adults who whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. She'd learned to notice things other kids missed. "No, Bug. I'm not in trouble. I'm just trying to help someone." "Who?" "A man who's sick. Like you." Lila's expression shifted, something understanding and sad flickering across her small face. "Does he have a daddy helping him?" "He has a sister, and she's doing everything she can." Lila nodded, satisfied with that answer. She slid out of bed, her bare feet padding across the worn carpet to the kitchen. Ethan followed, watching her pull a box of cereal from the cabinet with the kind of careful deliberation that broke his heart. Everything was harder for her. Everything took more energy. "Can I have the strawberry kind?" she asked. "You can have whatever you want." She poured herself a bowl, spilling a few pieces on the counter, and climbed onto the bar stool. Ethan sat across from her, his coffee untouched, and just watched her eat. The bruise on her arm was fading. The tremor in her left hand was barely noticeable today. Small mercies. His phone buzzed. A message from Vivian. "Meet me at the tower, 7 a.m. We have a lead." Ethan typed back, "I need to get my daughter to school first." The response was immediate. "Bring her. We'll arrange security and a driver. She'll be safer at school than at home." Ethan stared at the message. Part of him wanted to refuse, to keep Lila close where he could see her. But Vivian was right. If someone was watching his apartment, School was the better option. And if Hartwell Genomics Security was escorting her, no one was getting within 100 feet. Bug, Ethan said carefully, how would you feel about riding to school in a really fancy car today? Lila's eyes went wide. Like a limo? Maybe. Or something close. Can I tell Emma? Ethan smiled despite everything. You can tell whoever you want. 20 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up outside the building. Not a limo, but close enough that Lila's face lit up like Christmas morning. Graves was driving, and in the passenger seat was a woman Ethan didn't recognize. Mid-30s, athletic build, eyes that tracked every movement on the street. This is Agent Torres, Graves said as Ethan helped Lila into the back seat. She'll be shadowing Lila at school, plain clothes, unobtrusive. Your daughter won't even know she's there. Torres turned and gave Lila a warm smile. Hi, sweetheart. I hear you like strawberry cereal. Lila blinked, suddenly shy. How did you know? Lucky guess, Torres winked. You ready for school? Lila nodded, clutching her backpack. Ethan climbed in beside her and Graves pulled into traffic. The ride to Lila's elementary school took 15 minutes, and the whole time Ethan kept glancing out the back window, searching for anyone following them. Graves caught his eye in the rearview mirror and gave a slight shake of his head. No tail. When they pulled up to the curb outside Franklin Elementary, Torres got out first, scanned the area, then opened Lila's door. All clear. Ethan walked Lila to the entrance, crouching down to her level. You're going to have a good day, okay? And if anything feels weird, or if someone you don't know tries to talk to you, you find a teacher. Got it? Lila nodded seriously. Okay, Daddy. I'll pick you up right after school. I promise. She hugged him, her thin arms tight around his neck. And then she was gone, disappearing through the glass doors into the bright chaos of morning drop-off. Torres followed at a distance, her hand resting casually near her hip where Ethan knew she was carrying. Graves was waiting by the SUV. She'll be fine. Torres is one of the best. She better be, Ethan said quietly. They drove to the Hartwell Tower in silence. The city was waking up, traffic thickening, the sky turning from gray to pale blue. Ethan's exhaustion was catching up with him, his eyelids heavy, but his mind wouldn't shut down. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard that distorted voice. Lila won't live to see her 8th birthday. The tower's underground parking garage was empty except for a handful of executive vehicles. Graves parked near a private elevator, and they took it straight to the 22nd floor. The doors opened into Vivian's office suite, but instead of the minimalist calm Ethan remembered, the space had been transformed into a command center. Whiteboards covered one wall, covered in names, dates, and photographs connected by red string. Laptops were open on every surface, and 3 people Ethan didn't recognize were working intently, phones pressed to their ears. Vivian stood at the center of it all, wearing the same clothes from last night, her hair pulled into a severe ponytail. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Ethan, she said, waving him over. Good. We're running out of time. What did you find? Vivian pointed to the whiteboard. At the top was a photograph of Dr. Carlson, his face circled in red. Below him were 4 other names, each connected by arrows. Carlson didn't develop compound theta 7 alone. He had help, financial backing, lab space, test subjects. We've been tracing the money, and it leads to a shell company called Meridian Bioventures. Never heard of it. Most people haven't. It's a front. But the interesting part is, who sits on Meridian's board? Vivian tapped another photograph. A man in his 60s, silver hair, expensive suit. Marcus Dalton. He used to be the CFO of Hartwell Genomics. My father fired him 8 years ago for embezzlement. Ethan frowned. So this is revenge? Partially. But it's also about money. Dalton's been funneling investment into black market trials for years. Experimental treatments that would never pass FDA approval. He finds desperate patients, promises them miracles, and then uses them as guinea pigs. If the treatment works, he patents it and sells it for billions. If it doesn't, she trailed off. He buries the evidence, Ethan finished. Exactly. And Kieran was supposed to be another data point, another failure to cover up. Graves stepped forward, arms crossed. We've got Dalton's location. He's holed up in a private estate outside the city. Armed security cameras, the works. He knows we're coming. Then we don't give him time to prepare, Vivian said. She turned to Ethan. I need you to understand what you're walking into. Dalton is dangerous. He's connected. And if we move on him without airtight evidence, he'll disappear and we'll never see him again. What kind of evidence do you need? The kind that ties him directly to Kieran's poisoning. Financial records, communications, anything that proves he gave the order. Ethan's mind raced. Carlson would have that. He was the one running the trial. If Dalton was bankrolling it, there'd be a paper trail. Which is why we need to find Carlson before Dalton does, Vivian said. Because if Dalton gets to him first, Carlson will either disappear or end up in a body bag. Either way, we lose our witness. One of the people working the laptops, a young woman with glasses and a Bluetooth earpiece, looked up. I've got something. Carlson's credit card just pinged at a gas station in Millbrook, 40 minutes north. Vivian's eyes sharpened. When? 10 minutes ago. He's running for the border, Graves said. Millbrook's a straight shot to Canada. Vivian grabbed her jacket. Then we intercept him before he gets there. Cole, get a team together. Ethan, you're with me. Wait, Ethan said. I'm not a cop. I'm not trained for this. No, but you're the only person who's actually read Carlson's files. If we find him, I need you to verify what we're looking at. Vivian's gaze didn't waver. I'm not asking you to be a hero. I'm asking you to finish what you started. Ethan thought of Lila, safe at school with Torres watching over her. He thought of Kieran, sedated in a hospital bed, his body fighting off poison. He thought of the 3 patients who'd already died because no one had stopped this. Okay, he said. I'm in. Graves was already moving, barking orders into his phone. Within minutes, they were in 2 SUVs heading north on the highway, sirens silent but speed pushing 90. Ethan rode with Vivian in the lead vehicle, Graves driving, the world blurring past the windows. Tell me about your daughter, Vivian said suddenly. Ethan glanced at her. Why? Because I want to know who I'm fighting for. Ethan exhaled slowly. Her name's Lila. She's 7. She loves strawberries and anything purple. She wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up, even though she's allergic to cats. He paused. She's the smartest, bravest person I've ever met, and she deserves better than this. Vivian nodded. So does Kieran. He's younger than me by 3 years. Our parents died in a car accident when I was 22. I raised him, paid for his college, his apartment, everything. He's brilliant, smarter than I'll ever be, but he never wanted the corporate life. He teaches high school biology, coaches the debate team. Her voice softened. When he got diagnosed, he made me promise not to let it define him, not to treat him like he was fragile, and I tried. But when Carlson told me there was a trial, I couldn't just stand by. You were trying to save him. I was trying to control something I couldn't control, and I almost got him killed. That's not on you, Ethan said. Carlson lied. Dalton orchestrated it. You were a victim too. Vivian looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. You're generous with your forgiveness. I've made enough mistakes to know blame doesn't fix anything. They drove in silence for a while, the highway stretching out ahead of them. Then Graves' phone buzzed. He answered, listened, and his jaw tightened. Understood. We're 15 minutes out. He hung up and glanced at Vivian in the rear-view mirror. Carlson's car was spotted at a rest stop just outside Millbrook. Local PD has eyes on it, but they're holding position per our request. Good, Vivian said. We take him quiet. No spectacle. They pulled off the highway 10 minutes later, following a 2-lane road into a stretch of woods and farmland. The rest stop appeared ahead, a small parking lot, a couple of picnic tables, and a single-story building with restrooms. Carlson's car, a silver sedan, was parked near the tree line. Graves pulled the SUV into the lot slowly, scanning for threats. The second SUV stopped behind them, and 4 more security officers climbed out, all armed, all moving with military precision. Stay in the car, Graves told Ethan. Like hell, Ethan said. Vivian put a hand on his arm. He's right. Let them secure the scene first. Ethan watched as Graves and his team approached the sedan, weapons drawn. One officer checked the plates, confirmed it was Carlson's. Another peered through the windows. "Car's empty," the officer called out. Graves swore and turned toward the rest stop building. He moved to the entrance, pushed the door open, and disappeared inside. 30 seconds later, he emerged, shaking his head. "He's not here." Vivian got out of the SUV, Ethan right behind her. "Check the woods. He couldn't have gone far on foot." The team fanned out, moving into the tree line. Ethan stayed near the sedan, his eyes scanning the ground. Then he saw it, a scuff mark in the dirt, leading toward the back of the rest stop. He followed it, rounding the corner of the building, and stopped. Carlson was there, sitting on the ground, back against the wall, head tilted forward. For a second, Ethan thought he was asleep. Then he saw the blood. "Graves!" Ethan shouted. Graves and Vivian came running. Vivian pulled up short, her hand covering her mouth. Carlson's throat had been cut, the wound clean and deep. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. In his lap was a phone, screen still glowing. Graves knelt, checked for a pulse, even though it was pointless. "He's been dead less than an hour. Body's still warm." Vivian's face went white. "Dalton got to him." Ethan crouched beside Carlson's body, careful not to touch anything. The phone in his lap showed a text message thread. The last message, sent 20 minutes ago, read, "I told you what would happen if you ran." "He was Dalton's cleanup," Ethan said quietly, "and when he tried to save himself, Dalton erased him." Graves stood, already on his radio. "This is Graves. We have a homicide at the Route 12 rest stop. Contact the state police and get a forensic team here now." Vivian turned away, her hands shaking. "We lost him. We lost our witness." "Not necessarily," Ethan said. He pointed to the phone. "Dalton's message is still here, and if Carlson was smart, he backed up his files before he ran." Graves carefully picked up the phone using a glove, navigating through the apps. "He's got cloud storage, looks like hundreds of files. Medical records, financial transactions, emails." Vivian's eyes lit up. "Download everything. If there's even a shred of evidence tying Dalton to the trial, we'll use it to bury him." But Graves was frowning at the screen. "There's a problem. The files are encrypted. We'll need a password." Ethan studied Carlson's body, the way he'd positioned himself, the phone deliberately placed in his lap. "He wanted us to find this, which means he left us a way in." "How do you know?" "Because he knew he was going to die, and this was his insurance policy." Vivian knelt beside the body, searching Carlson's pockets. She pulled out a wallet, a set of keys, and a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully. Written in shaky handwriting was a single line. "The password is her name." "Her name?" Graves repeated. "Whose name?" Ethan's mind raced. He thought back to the documents he'd pieced together, the patient list, the names marked deceased. One had stood out, a woman, mid-30s, listed as the first test subject. "Anna Rossi," Ethan said. "She was the first patient in the trial. She died 6 months ago." Graves typed the name into the phone. The files unlocked. Vivian exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and exhaustion. "Get those files to our legal team, and get me everything that connects Dalton to this operation." Graves started scrolling, his expression darkening with every screen. "This is worse than we thought. Dalton wasn't just funding the trial. He was recruiting the patients, targeting people with rare diseases, people who were desperate and had no other options. He promised them cures and used them as test subjects." "How many?" Vivian asked. "At least 15. Maybe more." Ethan felt sick. 15 people, 15 families, all destroyed because one man wanted profit over ethics. "We need to move on Dalton now," Vivian said, "before he realizes Carlson's dead and goes into hiding." Graves shook his head. "We don't have the manpower to breach his estate. He's got private security, probably ex-military. We'd need a full tactical team, and that takes time we don't have." "Then we don't breach," Ethan said. Everyone turned to look at him. "We don't need to break in. We need Dalton to let us in." Vivian frowned. "How?" "He thinks he's won. Carlson's dead, the witness is gone, and he's safe behind his walls. But what if we give him a reason to come out?" "Like what?" Ethan's mind was spinning, pieces clicking together. He's been cleaning up loose ends. Carlson, the patients, anyone who could expose him. But there's one loose end he doesn't know about yet. You, Vivian said slowly. Me, the janitor who stumbled onto his operation. If he thinks I'm still poking around, still asking questions, he'll come after me. And when he does, we'll be ready. Graves looked skeptical. You want to use yourself as bait. I want to finish this, Ethan said. For Kieran, for Lila, for every person Dalton's hurt. Vivian studied him for a long moment. Then she turned to Graves. Can we protect him? If we control the environment, yeah, but it's risky. Everything about this is risky, Vivian said. She looked back at Ethan. Are you sure? Ethan thought of his daughter, sitting in a classroom right now, probably coloring or reading or laughing with her friends. He thought of the life she deserved, the future she might never have if people like Dalton kept treating human beings like commodities. I'm sure, he said. Vivian nodded. Then we set the trap. They planned the trap in the back of Graves' SUV while state police swarmed the rest stop behind them, yellow tape cordoning off Carlson's body like some grim exhibit. Ethan sat wedged between Vivian and one of the security officers, his hands still shaking from adrenaline, while Graves drove and coordinated over the radio with a precision that suggested he'd done this kind of thing before. We need a location Dalton will believe, Graves said, eyes on the road. Somewhere isolated enough that he'll think he can move without witnesses, but controllable enough that we can lock it down. Vivian was scrolling through her phone, pulling up property records. What about the old research facility, the one where we found Kieran? Too obvious, Graves said. Dalton knows we've already been there. He'll smell the setup. Ethan's mind churned through possibilities, trying to think like someone who'd spent years staying invisible, finding the gaps in systems that people in power never noticed. What about the Hartwell Warehouse District, the one on the east side near the river? Vivian looked up. We don't use those buildings anymore. They've been slated for demolition for 2 years. Exactly, Ethan said, which means they're off everyone's radar. No security cameras, no night staff, no reason for anyone to be there. If Dalton thinks I'm hiding out in one of those buildings, poking through old records, he'll see it as an easy cleanup. Graves glanced at him in the rearview mirror. How do we get him to believe you're there? We let him intercept a communication. Make it look like I'm panicking, reaching out to someone I trust. Maybe a phone call to a former coworker or an email to a lawyer. Something that mentions the warehouse, mentions evidence I've stashed there. Vivian's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. He's been monitoring communications. That's how he knew Carlson was running. If we make the call traceable enough, he'll pick it up. And when he does, Graves added, he'll send his people to make sure you never talk. Then we make sure his people walk into a hornet's nest instead, Vivian said. She turned to the officer beside Ethan. Contact our tactical consultant. I want a full team positioned in that warehouse complex by nightfall. Surveillance, snipers, the works, and I want them invisible. The officer nodded and started making calls. Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from Torres. Lila's fine. Ate lunch. Playing at recess. No issues. He exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Vivian noticed. Your daughter? Yeah, she's okay. She won't just be okay, Vivian said quietly. When this is over, I'm going to make sure she gets the best medical care on the planet. I promise you that. Ethan met her eyes. There was no calculation there, no corporate maneuvering, just raw sincerity. Thank you. They drove back to the city in tense silence, the weight of what they were about to do settling over everyone like a heavy blanket. By the time they reached the Hartwell Tower, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the plaza where just yesterday Ethan had screamed a warning that changed everything. Inside Vivian's command center, the team had grown. There were now 8 people working laptops and phones, coordinating with law enforcement, pulling financial records, building the case against Dalton brick by digital brick. A woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the bearing of a former prosecutor was directing traffic. That's Margaret Chen, Vivian said, noticing Ethan's curious look. My head of legal. If anyone can turn what we've found into an airtight case, it's her. Margaret looked up as they entered. We've got enough to file criminal charges, financial fraud, illegal human experimentation, conspiracy to commit murder. But it's all circumstantial, unless we can get Dalton on record or catch him in the act. We're working on that, Vivian said. She quickly outlined the plan. Margaret's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. You're using a civilian as bait. A volunteer, Vivian corrected, who has a 7-year-old daughter and no tactical training. If this goes wrong, we're not just losing a witness. We're responsible for a child losing her father. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on stopping Dalton, on making sure no one else died the way those 15 patients had died, that he hadn't fully processed what failure would mean for Lila. Then we don't let it go wrong, Vivian said, her voice hard. Cole will have a team in position. Ethan will be wired, protected, and extracted the second Dalton shows his hand. Margaret held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Get it in writing. Liability waiver, acknowledgement of risk, the works. I won't have this company destroyed because we played vigilante. Done, Vivian said. She turned to Ethan. You don't have to do this. We can find another way. But Ethan was already shaking his head. There is no other way. Dalton's too careful, too connected. This is the only shot we've got. Graves checked his watch. If we're doing this, we need to move. Sun sets in 2 hours. That's when Dalton will make his move, under cover of darkness. They spent the next 90 minutes preparing. Ethan was fitted with a wire so small he could barely feel it taped to his chest, the microphone disguised as a shirt button. Graves walked him through the warehouse layout using blueprints spread across Vivian's desk, marking exits, choke points, places to take cover if things went sideways. You're not a soldier, Graves said bluntly, so don't try to be one. Your job is simple. Get Dalton talking. Get him to admit what he's done. Once we have him on tape confessing, my team moves in. You hit the floor, cover your head, and let us do our job. What if he doesn't confess? Ethan asked. Then we arrest him anyway and let Margaret sort it out in court. But a confession makes it clean. No ambiguity, no room for his lawyers to spin the narrative. Vivian handed Ethan a phone. This is a burner. It's already programmed with one number, mine. If anything feels wrong, if you get even a hint that the plan's compromised, you call me and we pull you out. Understood? Ethan pocketed the phone. Understood. At 6 p.m., they put the first phase into motion. Ethan called a number that Graves had set up, a dummy line that would look like it belonged to a legal aid clinic. The call was designed to be intercepted to sound desperate and unrehearsed. Hello? A recorded voice answered, professional and detached. Ethan took a breath and launched into the script they'd rehearsed. Hi, my name is Ethan Rourke. I need to speak to someone about witness protection. I have information about a company that's been killing people in illegal medical trials, and I think they're going to come after me. A pause, as if the person on the other end was taking notes. Can you tell me where you are now, Mr. Rourke? I'm hiding in one of the old Hartwell warehouses on the east side, Building 6 near the river. I have documents, evidence, everything, but I need help getting somewhere safe. Stay where you are. Someone will contact you within the hour. Ethan hung up. The whole team was silent, watching the monitoring equipment. If Dalton had taps on legal clinics, public defenders, anyone a desperate witness might reach out to, the call would ping on his radar within minutes. They waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Ethan's nerves were fraying, his mind conjuring worst-case scenarios. What if Dalton wasn't monitoring? What if he'd already fled the country? What if this whole plan was a waste of time and resources while the real threat slipped through their fingers? Then one of the tech analysts sat up straight. Got something. Outbound call from a blocked number to a private line registered to Meridian BioVentures. Lasted 40 seconds. Vivian leaned over the analyst's shoulder. Can you trace it? Already on it. Call originated from a cell tower near Dalton's estate. Graves smiled, but there was no humor in it. He took the bait. How long until he moves? Vivian asked. If he's smart, he'll send advanced scouts to confirm Ethan's actually there. Figure 30 minutes to an hour before the main event. Vivian turned to Ethan. You're sure about this? Ethan thought of Lila, probably sitting down to dinner at Mrs. Chen's right now, chattering about her day. He thought of Kieran, fighting for every breath in a hospital bed. He thought of Anna Rossi and the 14 other names on that patient list, people who trusted the wrong man and paid with their lives. "I'm sure," he said. They loaded into 3 vehicles, Ethan and Graves in the lead SUV, Vivian and 2 security officers in the second, and a tactical van bringing up the rear. The warehouse district was a 20-minute drive through industrial sprawl and crumbling infrastructure, past chain-link fences and graffiti-tagged walls. The sun was nearly gone now, the sky burning orange and purple. Building 6 loomed ahead, a massive concrete shell with broken windows and a rusted loading dock. Graves parked 2 blocks away, and the team moved in on foot, spreading out to prearranged positions. Ethan watched them disappear into the shadows, 2 snipers taking high ground on adjacent buildings, 4 officers setting up inside the warehouse itself, hidden behind old machinery and support columns. Graves handed Ethan a flashlight and a Kevlar vest. "Put this on. And remember, you're not a hero. You're bait. Act scared, act desperate, but don't do anything stupid." Ethan strapped on the vest, the weight of it unfamiliar and uncomfortable. "Define stupid." "Anything that gets you killed." Vivian appeared beside them, her face tight with worry. "We'll be listening the whole time. If Dalton brings weapons, if he makes any move that feels threatening, we shut it down. Your safety is the priority." "Second priority," Ethan corrected. "First priority is making sure he can't hurt anyone else." Vivian looked like she wanted to argue, but Graves was already checking his watch. "Time to move. Ethan, you're on." Ethan walked toward Building 6 alone, his footsteps echoing in the empty street. The warehouse's main entrance was a rusted metal door hanging half off its hinges. He slipped inside, the flashlight beam cutting through darkness thick with dust and the smell of decay. The interior was a cathedral of abandonment, high ceilings supported by iron girders, old conveyor belts frozen in place, pallets stacked haphazardly like some giant's forgotten toys. Ethan moved deeper into the building, his heart hammering, every shadow a potential threat. He found a spot near the center of the floor, beneath a skylight that let in the last traces of twilight, and sat down on an overturned crate. Then he waited. The minutes stretched. Ethan's ears strained for any sound. Footsteps, voices, the scrape of a door opening. Nothing. Just the distant hum of the city and the occasional creak of old metal settling. Then, faint but unmistakable, the sound of a car engine. It cut off abruptly, somewhere close. Doors opened and closed. Voices, low and controlled. Ethan's pulse spiked. He tapped the button on his watch, the signal to Graves that contact was imminent. The warehouse door groaned open. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with military precision. Flashlight beams swept the interior, and Ethan forced himself to stay still, to look like exactly what he was supposed to be. A terrified man hiding in the dark. "Ethan Rourke?" The voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. Ethan stood slowly, raising his hands. "Who's asking?" A man stepped into the pool of light beneath the skylight. Marcus Dalton, looking exactly like his photographs, silver hair, tailored suit, the kind of face that belonged on a boardroom or a campaign poster. Behind him were 3 men in tactical gear, all armed. "You've caused quite a bit of trouble, Mr. Rourke," Dalton said, his tone almost conversational. "For a janitor." "I'm just trying to protect my daughter," Ethan said, letting his voice shake. "Admirable, but ultimately pointless." Dalton gestured to one of his men, who moved forward and grabbed Ethan roughly, patting him down. The man's hands found the vest, paused. "He's wearing Kevlar," the man reported. Dalton's expression didn't change. "Expecting trouble?" "I wasn't sure what to expect," Ethan said. "I just know people have been dying, and I don't want to be next." "Smart, but not smart enough." Dalton nodded to another of his men, who produced a small electronic device and began sweeping Ethan for bugs. The device beeped near Ethan's chest. The man ripped open Ethan's shirt, exposing the wire. Dalton sighed. "Disappointing. I thought you might actually be clever." He raised his voice slightly. "Ms. Hartwell, I assume you're listening. Let's not waste each other's time with elaborate charades." Ethan's stomach dropped. The plan had just collapsed, but Dalton wasn't done. He pulled out a phone and dialed. "I know you're here somewhere, so here's my proposal. You, me, and Mr. Rourke have a conversation." A real one. No wires, no tactical teams, no games. If you agree, I'll let him walk out of here alive. If you don't, he let the threat hang. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Vivian's voice crackled over a radio one of Dalton's men was carrying. Let him go first. Then we'll talk. No, Dalton said. We talk now or he dies now. Your choice. Ethan saw movement in his peripheral vision. Graves and his team shifting position, preparing to breach. But if they moved, Dalton's men would open fire. It would be a bloodbath. Stand down, Vivian's voice said, and Ethan realized she was talking to her own team. I'm coming in. Vivian, no! Graves started, but she cut him off. Stand. Down. 30 seconds later, Vivian walked through the warehouse door, hands raised, no visible weapons. She moved with the same controlled grace she'd had in her office, like she was walking into a board meeting instead of a potential execution. Let him go, she said to Dalton. In a moment. First, I want to make sure we understand each other. Dalton gestured to his men, who forced Ethan to his knees. One of them pressed a gun to the back of his head. Vivian's face went white, but her voice stayed steady. What do you want? The same thing I've always wanted, control. You see, Vivian, your father understood something you never have. Progress requires sacrifice. Those patients, Carlson's test subjects, they were dying anyway. I simply gave their deaths meaning. You murdered them, Vivian said. I advanced science. I pushed boundaries. And yes, some people died. But how many lives will be saved when compound theta 7 is perfected? Hundreds? Thousands? It doesn't work, Ethan said through gritted teeth. It's poison. It's a work in progress, Dalton corrected. And it would have succeeded if your brother hadn't been so inconveniently positioned. He looked at Vivian. Kieran was supposed to validate the compound. His death would have been proof of concept, accelerated vascular degeneration, controllable and replicable. But you had to interfere. You tried to kill my brother to prove your theory works? Vivian's voice was shaking now, not with fear, but with rage. I tried to complete a trial that would have changed medicine forever, but you and your janitor ruined it. So now we're going to fix this. You're going to shut down the investigation, bury the evidence, and declare Carlson's death a suicide. In exchange, I'll let you both live. And if I refuse? Dalton nodded to the man holding the gun to Ethan's head. Then Mr. Rourke becomes a tragic casualty of his own paranoia. Broke into an abandoned warehouse, got himself killed by squatters or addicts. Happens all the time in this neighborhood. Ethan's mind raced. He could hear the faint crackle of the radio on one of Dalton's men, which meant Graves and the team were still listening, which meant they knew the plan had changed, which meant they were waiting for a signal. Ethan caught Vivian's eye and gave the smallest nod. She understood. You want me to bury evidence? Vivian said, her voice suddenly calm. Fine. But I need to know what I'm burying. Tell me everything. How many patients did you kill? How much money did you steal? Who else is involved? Dalton smiled. You think I'm going to confess? I think you're arrogant enough to brag. Vivian took a step closer. You said it yourself. You advanced science. You pushed boundaries, so tell me. Make me understand why 15 people had to die. 15? Dalton laughed. Try 37. Across 4 trials, 3 countries, and 6 years. All of them terminal. All of them willing. And all of them necessary. Ethan's blood turned to ice. 37. Vivian's expression didn't change. And Kieran? Why him? Because he was perfect. Young, otherwise healthy, and tied to you. If the compound worked, you'd fund the next phase. If it didn't, his death would discredit you and clear my path to take over Hartwell Genomics entirely. Dalton shrugged. Win-win. Except we stopped you, Vivian said. You delayed me. There's a difference. No, a new voice said from the shadows. There's not. Cole Graves stepped into the light, his weapon raised, and suddenly the warehouse was flooded with tactical lights. Snipers appeared on the catwalks above. Officers moved in from every entrance, weapons trained on Dalton's men. Drop your weapons, Graves ordered. Now. For a moment, no one moved. Then Dalton's men, realizing they were outgunned and outmaneuvered, lowered their guns and raised their hands. The man holding Ethan released him, and Ethan scrambled to his feet, his legs shaking. Dalton didn't look surprised. He looked almost amused. Clever. The wire was a decoy. You had him broadcast the whole thing. Vivian pulled a small recording device from her pocket. Every word, 37 murders, conspiracy, attempted murder of a corporate officer. That should be enough. Dalton's smile didn't fade. You think this ends with me? I have lawyers, Vivian. I have connections. I'll be out in 48 hours. Maybe, Vivian said. But you'll spend those 48 hours in a cell. And when the families of those 37 patients hear what you've done, when the media gets hold of this recording, when every regulator and oversight board in the country starts digging into Meridian BioVentures, you'll be finished. Graves moved forward, pulling out handcuffs. Marcus Dalton, you're under arrest. Dalton didn't resist. As Graves cuffed him, he looked at Ethan one last time. You should have stayed invisible, Janitor. Ethan met his gaze. I tried, but some things are worth being seen for. They led Dalton out, his men following in zip ties. The warehouse emptied slowly, tactical teams securing evidence, radios crackling with coordination. Vivian stood beside Ethan, both of them watching the controlled chaos. You did it, she said quietly. We did it, Ethan corrected. Vivian's phone buzzed. She answered, listened, and her face transformed. Kieran's awake. He's asking for me. Relief flooded through Ethan. Go, I'll finish up here. But Vivian grabbed his arm. You're coming with me. You saved his life. He should know who to thank. They drove to County General through streets slick with rain that had started falling while they were in the warehouse. The city lights reflecting off wet pavement like scattered jewels. Ethan sat in the back of Vivian's car, still wearing the torn shirt and Kevlar vest, his hands trembling with aftershock adrenaline. Vivian was on her phone the entire ride, coordinating with Margaret Chen about Dalton's arrest, with the hospital about Kieran's condition, with Torres about Lila. Your daughter's asking when you're picking her up, Vivian said, lowering her phone. Torres says she's getting worried. Ethan checked the time. 8:15. He'd promised Lila he'd get her right after school, and here it was nearly bedtime. Can someone bring her to the hospital? Already arranged. Torres is driving her over now. Vivian paused. I thought you might want her close tonight. Thank you, Ethan said, and meant it with everything he had. The hospital's parking garage was nearly empty at this hour. They took the elevator to the fourth-floor ICU, where Kieran had been moved after stabilizing. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, and every room they passed held some private tragedy playing out behind curtains and beeping monitors. Kieran's room was at the end of the corridor, a private suite with a window overlooking the city. 2 security officers stood outside, Graves had insisted, even though Dalton was in custody. When Vivian approached, they stepped aside. He's weak, one of them said quietly, but the doctors say he's going to make it. Vivian nodded and pushed open the door. Ethan followed her inside. Kieran Hartwell looked nothing like his sister. Where Vivian was all sharp edges and controlled intensity, Kieran had a softness to him, gentle eyes, sandy hair falling across his forehead, the kind of face that belonged to someone who spent his life teaching kids about cellular biology and coaching debate teams. He was propped up in bed, oxygen cannula in his nose, IV lines running from both arms. His skin was pale, almost translucent, but his eyes were alert. Viv, he said, his voice rough but warm. You look terrible. Vivian laughed, and it was the first time Ethan had heard her sound genuinely happy. She crossed to the bed and took her brother's hand carefully, like she was afraid he might break. You're one to talk. You nearly died. I heard. Kieran's eyes shifted to Ethan. You must be the janitor who saved my life. Ethan stepped forward awkwardly. Ethan Rourke. Kieran Hartwell. Though I guess you already knew that. Kieran's smile was genuine despite his exhaustion. My sister told me what you did. Crawling through vents, fighting off hired killers, getting yourself nearly murdered to stop Dalton. That's either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both, Ethan admitted. Well, I'm grateful either way. Kieran's expression grew serious. Vivian said you have a daughter, same condition as me. Yeah, Lila, she's 7. Then you understand what it's like, living with this. Kieran glanced at the monitors tracking his vital signs. I've spent my whole adult life trying not to let it define me, trying to be normal. But there's nothing normal about knowing your own body is a ticking time bomb. Ethan pulled a chair closer and sat. Lila doesn't know how serious it is. She knows she gets tired, knows she has to be careful, but she's 7. She still thinks she's going to grow up and be a veterinarian. Maybe she will, Kieran said quietly. Vivian told me she's funding research. Real research, not the nightmare Carlson was running. Vivian was standing by the window now, her back to them, arms crossed. I've already contacted the top geneticists in the country. We're establishing a foundation specifically for vascular Ehlers-Danlos research. Unlimited funding, full transparency, independent oversight, everything Dalton's operation wasn't. That's going to cost millions, Kieran said. I have millions. And after what almost happened to you, after what did happen to those 37 patients, I'm not letting another person die from this disease if I can help it. Vivian turned to face them. Ethan, I meant what I said. Lila will have access to every specialist, every experimental treatment, every resource we can bring to bear. No costs, no insurance fights, no bureaucracy, just medicine. Ethan's throat tightened. I don't know how to thank you. You already did. You saved my brother. A knock at the door interrupted them. Torres appeared, and beside her, holding her hand tightly, was Lila. She was wearing her purple jacket and clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide as she took in the hospital room. Daddy! She let go of Torres and ran to Ethan, who caught her and pulled her into his lap. Hey, Bug. I'm sorry I'm late. Miss Torres said you were helping someone who was sick. Lila looked at Kieran with the solemn curiosity of a child. Are you the sick person? Kieran smiled. I was, but I'm getting better now. Because of my daddy? Because of your daddy, Kieran confirmed. Lila looked up at Ethan, her expression suddenly fierce. You're a hero. Ethan kissed the top of her head. I'm just your dad. Can't you be both? Vivian approached them, crouching down to Lila's level. Hi, Lila. My name is Vivian. That's my brother Kieran. Lila studied her with the frank assessment only children can pull off. You're really pretty. Vivian blinked, caught off guard. Thank you. You're very sweet. My daddy says you're going to help me not be sick anymore. I'm going to try, Vivian said carefully. There are some very smart doctors who are going to work very hard to find medicine that will make you feel better. Will it hurt? Maybe sometimes. But your daddy will be with you the whole time. Lila seemed satisfied with that answer. She yawned, leaning against Ethan's chest. I'm tired. I know, Bug. We'll go home soon. But Vivian stood. Actually, I've arranged a suite at the Regency Hotel for tonight. 2 bedrooms, room service, anything you need. I thought you might want somewhere safe and comfortable after everything that's happened. Ethan started to protest, but Vivian held up a hand. It's already done. And tomorrow, we'll sit down and talk about next steps. Medical care, security arrangements, everything. But tonight, you and Lila deserve to rest. Ethan looked at his daughter, her eyes already drooping, and realized he didn't have the energy to argue. Okay, thank you. Torres drove them to the hotel, a gleaming high-rise in the financial district that Ethan had walked past 1,000 times, but never dreamed of entering. The suite was on the 20th floor, all floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that probably cost more than his annual salary. Lila's eyes went huge. Daddy, this is like a castle. Just for tonight, Ethan said, though part of him wondered if anything would ever be just again after what had happened. He got Lila into bed in the smaller bedroom, tucking her rabbit beside her. She was asleep before he finished pulling the blankets up. Ethan stood there for a long time, watching her breathe, trying to reconcile the terror of the past 48 hours with the peace of this moment. His phone buzzed, a message from Vivian. Kieran's stable. Doctors say full recovery expected. Thank you again. Ethan typed back, How are you holding up? The response took a minute. Exhausted, angry, relieved, all of it at once. Ethan understood that. He felt the same way. He fell asleep on the couch, still wearing his torn shirt, and dreamed of warehouses and amber fluid and Dalton's cold smile. Morning came too bright and too early. Lila woke him by jumping on the couch, her energy restored by a good night's sleep. "Daddy, there's a whole menu of breakfast foods. Can I have pancakes?" They ordered room service, pancakes for Lila, coffee and eggs for Ethan, and ate by the window while the city woke up below them. It felt surreal, like they'd stepped into someone else's life. But when Ethan looked at the bruise still fading on Lila's arm, the tremor that occasionally flickered through her left hand, he remembered this wasn't a vacation. This was a battlefield, and they were still fighting. At 10 a.m., Vivian arrived. She looked different in daylight, softer somehow, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual armor of tailored suits. She sat with them at the suite's dining table and pulled out a folder. "I've been working with our medical team," she said, sliding papers across to Ethan. "There's a clinical trial starting at Johns Hopkins next month. New gene therapy approach for connective tissue disorders. It's not specifically for vascular EDS yet, but the principal investigator thinks Lila would be a good candidate." Ethan scanned the documents, his heart pounding. "What are the risks?" "Standard for gene therapy. Immune response, infection, possibility of no effect. But the preliminary data from animal models is promising, and the team running it is the best in the world." "What's the cost?" "Covered, fully, by the foundation." Ethan looked up. "You already established it?" "I filed the paperwork last night. The Kieran and Lila Foundation for Vascular Ehlers-Danlos Research. First project, funding that trial. Second project, establishing a patient registry and support network. Third project, recruiting researchers away from corporate labs and giving them resources to actually make progress." Vivian's eyes were fierce. "I'm not letting what happened to Kieran happen to anyone else. Ever." Lila, who'd been coloring at the other end of the table, looked up. "Is the foundation named after me?" "It is," Vivian said, "because you and my brother are the reason we're fighting." "That's cool," Lila said matter-of-factly, and went back to her drawing. Ethan felt tears pressing at the corners of his eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let us help. Say you'll bring Lila to Baltimore and give this trial a chance." "Of course. Yes, absolutely." Vivian smiled, and it reached her eyes this time. "Good, because I've also arranged something else." She pulled out another set of documents. "This is an employment contract. Director of Patient Safety and Advocacy for Hartwell Genomics. Your job would be to audit our trials, interface with patients and families, and make sure what happened with Carlson never happens again." Ethan stared at the papers. "I'm a janitor. You were a janitor. Now you're the man who exposed a conspiracy and saved lives. And you see things other people miss. That's exactly what we need." "I don't have a degree. I don't have experience." "You have integrity, you have courage, and you have perspective that no PhD can teach." Vivian leaned forward. "I'm not offering this out of charity, Ethan. I'm offering it because you'd be genuinely good at it, and because our company needs to be better. You can help us get there." Ethan looked at Lila, who was watching him with those perceptive eyes. "What do you think, Bug? Should Daddy take a new job?" "Will you still have time to read me stories?" "Always." "Then okay." Ethan looked back at Vivian. "When do I start?" "Whenever you're ready. Take a week, get settled, get Lila enrolled in the trial. We'll be here when you are." They shook hands, and Ethan felt the weight of the past 3 years, the fear, the debt, the exhaustion, begin to lift just slightly. Not gone, but manageable. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the future didn't look like a closing door. The next week passed in a blur. Dalton was formally charged with 37 counts of murder, conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. His lawyers tried to get him released on bail, but Margaret Chen presented the recording of his confession, and the judge remanded him without bond. The story broke nationally: corrupt biotech executive, illegal human trials, janitor hero. Ethan did one interview with a local news station and then refused all others. He wasn't interested in fame. He was interested in making sure Lila got better. Kieran was released from the hospital after 5 days. He came to Ethan's apartment, the real one, not the hotel suite, and sat on the worn couch drinking terrible coffee while Lila showed him her drawings. "She's amazing," Kieran said quietly while Lila was in the other room. "Reminds me of myself at that age. Curious, tough, trying to pretend everything's normal." Does it get easier? Ethan asked. Living with this? Easier? No. But you learn to carry it. You learn to find joy in the small things, and you learn that you're more than your diagnosis. Kieran paused. Thanks to you, I'm going to get a lot more years to remember that. Thanks to Vivian, Ethan corrected. She's the one who didn't give up. She told me you said the same thing about her. I think you're both wrong. Kieran smiled. I think you saved each other. 2 weeks later, Ethan and Lila flew to Baltimore. The Johns Hopkins campus was massive and intimidating, but the research team was kind and patient. They explained the gene therapy process to Lila in terms she could understand, using toys and drawings. She'd need to stay in Baltimore for 6 weeks, undergoing infusions and monitoring. It would be hard, maybe painful, and there were no guarantees. But it was hope. Real, tangible hope. Vivian visited twice during those 6 weeks, bringing books for Lila and takeout for Ethan. Kieran came once, spending an afternoon teaching Lila about cells and DNA, using a model kit he'd brought from his classroom. Graves sent care packages, coloring books, movies, a stuffed animal that looked like a tiny security guard. And slowly, day by day, Lila started getting stronger. The tremor in her hand lessened. Her energy improved. The bruises that had appeared at the slightest touch began to heal faster. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, saying the gene therapy was integrating better than they'd hoped. It's not a cure, the lead researcher told Ethan in week 5. She'll still need to be careful, still need monitoring. But if these results hold, she could live a normal lifespan, maybe even an unrestricted one. Ethan cried in the hospital bathroom for 10 minutes, letting out 3 years of fear and grief and desperate hope. When they returned to the city, Ethan started his new job at Hartwell Genomics. His office was small but had a window, and he spent his days reviewing trial protocols, meeting with patients, and building systems to prevent another Carlson from slipping through the cracks. It was hard work, sometimes frustrating, but it mattered. He was making a difference. 6 months after that night in the warehouse, Dalton's trial began. Ethan testified, as did Vivian, Kieran, and representatives from the families of the 37 victims. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Dalton was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As they walked out of the courthouse, Vivian turned to Ethan. It's over. Is it? Ethan asked. The legal part, yes. The rest... She looked up at the sky, the clouds breaking apart to let through afternoon sun. The rest is just beginning. She was right. The foundation grew rapidly, funding research at a dozen institutions. Within a year, 3 new treatment approaches entered clinical trials. Within 2, one showed enough promise to fast-track FDA approval. Patients who'd been told there was no hope began hearing different words from their doctors. We can help. Lila thrived. By her 8th birthday, she was running and playing like any other kid, the disease still present but managed, controlled. She joined the soccer team at school and started talking about being a scientist instead of a veterinarian because, as she told Ethan, I want to help kids like me. Kieran returned to teaching, stronger than before, using his experience to connect with students who felt invisible or overlooked. He and Ethan became close friends, meeting for coffee every week to talk about everything from gene therapy breakthroughs to the challenges of living with chronic illness. And Vivian transformed Hartwell Genomics from a profit-driven corporation into something that actually served patients. She instituted new oversight systems, transparency requirements, and patient advocacy programs. The company's stock took a hit initially, but within 2 years it rebounded as trust was restored and innovations accelerated. On a cool October afternoon 3 years after that night, when Ethan screamed a warning across a corporate plaza, he stood in his backyard, an actual backyard, attached to an actual house he could afford thanks to his new salary, and watched Lila kick a soccer ball with Kieran. Vivian was there too, sitting on the porch with a glass of wine, watching her brother laugh in the fading sunlight. You know, Vivian said as Ethan joined her, I've been thinking about that day, when you ran out of the building screaming at me not to get in my car. Hard to forget, Ethan said. I was so angry. I thought you were insane. I was ready to have you arrested, maybe worse. She paused. But you knew something I didn't. You saw a threat I couldn't see. And you risked everything to warn me anyway. I didn't think about it. I just reacted. That's what makes it heroic. Vivian looked at him. You know what the difference is between people like you and people like Dalton? You see people. He saw commodities, data points, acceptable losses. But you saw Kieran as a human being worth saving. You saw those patients as people who deserved justice. You saw me as someone who needed help, even when I didn't know it yet. I saw my daughter in every one of them, Ethan said quietly, and I couldn't stand by. The world needs more people who can't stand by. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Lila and Kieran, listening to their laughter. The disease hadn't been defeated, it might never be completely, but it had been faced, fought, and pushed back far enough that futures were possible again. Graves pulled up in his SUV, off-duty and wearing civilian clothes. He'd retired from corporate security 6 months ago and now ran a private firm that specialized in protecting medical researchers and whistleblowers. He walked over carrying a cooler full of beer and the kind of cookies Lila loved. "Room for one more?" he asked. "Always," Vivian said. They spent the evening together, the CEO and the former janitor, the teacher and the security chief, the little girl who'd been given a second chance at life, sharing a meal and stories and the quiet satisfaction of having survived something that should have destroyed them. As the sun set and the first stars appeared, Lila climbed into Ethan's lap, tired but happy. "Daddy?" "Yeah, Bug. I'm glad you screamed that day." Ethan kissed her forehead. "Me too. Even though it was scary?" "Especially because it was scary. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is speak up when everyone expects you to stay quiet." Lila nodded, processing this with the seriousness she brought to everything. Then she looked up at the darkening sky. "Do you think the people who died because of the bad man are watching?" Ethan glanced at Vivian, who was listening. "I think they'd be happy knowing that what happened to them is never going to happen to anyone else. Because you stopped it. Because we all stopped it together." Lila smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes. Within minutes she was asleep, her breathing steady and strong. Ethan held her close, feeling the steady beat of her heart, and thought about all the moments that had led to this one. The shredded documents he'd pieced together, the sprint across the plaza, the warehouse confrontation, the wire, the confession, the arrests. All of it had started with a choice to see what others wanted to stay hidden, to speak when silence would have been safer, to run toward danger instead of away from it. He'd been invisible for so long, moving through spaces where no one noticed him, emptying trash bins and mopping floors and existing in the margins. But invisibility, he'd learned, was a choice, and so was being seen. Vivian raised her glass. To second chances. Kieran raised his. To the people who fight for them. Graves raised his. To families, chosen and otherwise. Ethan raised his bottle of water, not wanting to jostle Lila. To speaking up when it matters most. They drank, and the night settled around them, warm despite the autumn chill, full of the kind of peace that only comes after surviving a war. The foundation would continue its work. The trials would advance. More lives would be saved. But tonight, in this backyard under these stars, 5 people who'd been brought together by crisis and bound by courage simply existed in the aftermath of their victory. They'd dragged truth into daylight. They'd held power accountable. They'd proven that even the most invisible person could change everything. And in the morning, they'd wake up and do it all again. Not fighting villains this time, but fighting disease and ignorance and the systems that let people fall through cracks. It was harder work, slower work, work that might take decades to show results. But Ethan Rourke had learned something in that warehouse, with a gun to his head and his daughter's future hanging in the balance. The hardest fights are the ones worth having, and the smallest voices, when they refuse to stay silent, can shout down empires. Lila stirred in his arms, mumbled something about soccer and scientists, and settled back into sleep. Ethan held her closer, looked at the people who'd become his family, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping kind that comes from having no other choice, but the steady, certain kind that comes from knowing you've already survived the worst and come out stronger. The invisible janitor had been seen. The voiceless had spoken. And the world, just a little bit, had changed. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.